Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Ukraine This Week with me, Don Arlett. Since last week's edition, intense negotiations between the U.S., Ukraine, and European leaders resulted in promising position rather than the worst-case scenario. But robust security guarantees have still yet to have been defined, and Ukraine doubled down on not relinquishing its territory in the Donbass. Meanwhile, the Kremlin demonstrated that it would keep up assaults on Ukraine, and Vladimir Putin said he would continue the war until the objectives of the so-called special military operation are achieved. Although Donald Trump claimed that lots of progress had been made and the two sides were closer than ever before, don't expect any breakthroughs anytime soon. We'll discuss this week's developments with our guest, but first let's see these stories from Ukraine this week. Despite an acceleration in diplomacy this week around Ukraine, the gap between peace talk optics and battlefield reality has only widened. In Berlin, Ukrainian, American, and European negotiators opened a new round of talks, with President Volodymyr Zelensky signaling he could drop Ukraine's NATO ambitions if allies offer NATO-style security guarantees. In The Hague, Zelensky told the Council of Europe, which established an international claims commission for Ukraine, that peace can't be reduced to a deal on paper, and insisted Russia must abide by the rules and the accountability and consequences that come with them.
It's not enough to force Russia into a deal. It's not enough to make it stop killing. We must make Russia accept that there are rules in the world and that it cannot deceive everyone. This is the path to lasting peace.
Early on Friday, EU leaders agreed to an interest-free €90 billion loan package for Ukraine after failing to reach a consensus on using frozen Russian assets as a source of funding. Zelensky also met with Poland's president, Karol Nawrocki, in Warsaw for his first sit-down with Poland's new head of state. In Washington, President Donald Trump said talks are advancing ahead of a U.S. meeting with Russian officials this weekend in Miami.
They're getting close to something, but I hope Ukraine moves quickly. I hope Ukraine moves quickly because Russia's there. And, every time they take too much time, then Russia changes their mind.
Russia is not letting up its pressure from the air. A drone strike hit a 9-story apartment building in Zaporizhzhia on Tuesday, wounding at least 4 people and sparking fires in multiple apartments. Separate attacks hit Odessa, and shelling on the Kherson front killed 1 person and wounded another. Zaporizhzhia was hit again on Wednesday and Thursday with guided aerial bombs, wounding at least 20 people, including a child, while an FPV drone attack in the Donetsk region struck emergency responders in Druskivka. Ukraine claimed a breakthrough at sea, claiming underwater drones hit a docked Russian submarine in Novorossiysk, a platform capable of launching Caliber missiles. Kyiv called it a first. Moscow denied the damage. Ukraine also reported a deep strike inside Russia at the Astrakhan gas processing plant, with satellite images later showing changes at the Novorossiysk base. Analysts cautioned the pictures are inconclusive, but said the operation still underlines Ukraine's ability to penetrate a heavily defended harbor. As leaders push for a diplomatic breakthrough, the war on the ground shows no sign of slowing, with fresh talks planned this weekend and Ukraine still under daily fire. The coming days may prove decisive in determining whether momentum shifts towards negotiations or deeper escalation. And joining us now is Dr. Vladimir Dubovik, Director of the Center for International Studies at Odessa Metropolitan National University. Vladimir, thank you so much for joining us on Ukraine.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, now we've got, quite a bit happened this week. We started off quite promising, actually, from where we were last week, and then we saw over the weekend the negotiations with the United States, then the negotiations with the U.S. and European leaders in Ukraine. So it looks like territorial concessions Vladimir Zelensky saying we're not going to give up the territories we control in the Donbass, but we still don't know also what these ironclad security guarantees could or may look like. Based on what we've seen this week, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a busy week indeed. I mean, the Berlin negotiations looked fine to us in the sense that they helped to rectify the bad peace plan, the 28 points, notorious, ominous points that unfortunately were kind of pressed on Ukraine, and we had to deal with it. Maybe it was our mistake to some extent. Maybe it was European allies that we didn't push forward our own plan, and we waited and waited. And
or maybe it was Steve Witkoff.
Yeah, right. And then 28 points arrived, and that was terrible, obviously. So there was a lot of work done with the American team, including in Berlin, for 2 days to make it better. But make it better for Ukraine, make it better for European security, so maybe not necessarily better for Russia. So we'll see if Russia actually discards the plan, or maybe they would say, okay, it's imperfect, we want to do some more work on it. That's what I expect, actually, the later, that the Russia would not openly say we don't like the plan, so because it would infuriate Trump, maybe, but they would say it's a good plan now, but we still have some things to change there. In terms of security guarantees, that's where I really worried, because I don't see any ironclad, as you say, any binding, any really committing security guarantees emerging. I see a lot of promises. I see a lot of palaces in the sky. You know, I basically see a lot of repetition of a Budapest Memorandum kind of style of guarantees or assurances from Budapest Memorandum 1994, when we got these assurances and no one was responsible for anything. It's quite vague. But also I see that Americans, for instance, they promise their security guarantees, and it seems that only to the point that, okay, to force Ukrainians to actually sign a deal, and then start a discussion about security guarantees. But that's the main issue to us in Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. We heard, I believe it was Secretary of State Rubio say that we're going to talk about security guarantees after a deal is signed. Obviously, you can't put the cart before the horse.
Right.
Well, another thing that kind of sparks my interest this week is, of course, the Europeans. Now, I see a marked difference between the United States, who tends to see, or under the Trump administration is trying to see the world as it is, versus the Europeans, who are trying to see the world as they would like it to be.
Right.
And I think that this is a major issue, but we did see Chancellor Friedrich Merz this week talking about this coalition of the willing, this peacekeeping force from European countries that would go into Ukraine and essentially be the guarantor. In some respects, he even told, I think it was ZDF, that they would even engage in the, if there were attacks or if the ceasefire was broken, then the European troops would engage. So is this more positive, or is, again, this is the world that they want to see, but they're unable to really get a consensus on this?
Right, that's right. I mean, I wouldn't say that Trump and his administration are somehow realists and pragmatists, and Europeans are naive idealists. On the contrary, I think Trump has a chance to actually shape better Euro-Atlantic security itself at the moment by applying some more pressure on Moscow and supplying more assistance to Ukraine. That would be more realistic, or more of an offensive realism kind of style. They can do that. You know, Europe, at the same time, is very much lost in the moment sometimes, expecting too much from Washington, trying to coordinate the activities on sanctions, on reassurance force, on security guarantees with Washington. There is now the dominating understanding that without US you can't do it. So back and forth since the start of this year, basically for the fall 2025, there have been countless meetings on reassurance force and peacekeeping troops by Western countries in Ukraine. And still there is no consensus. And still no understanding who is going, who is not, where they're going to be placed, what mandate, what kind of weapons, what actually happens if they are attacked. Even though the dominating view now that they will be far away from front line in the western part of Ukraine. And then the question begets, like, why do we even need them there, all right? Because actually the front line is many, many hundred miles away to the east. So if they're just sitting there and Russia is continuing attacking Ukrainians, how they are becoming a peacekeeping force, a tripwire that we are, Ukrainians, hoping they will be. That's
Right.
for us the only reason why they should be sent to Ukraine.
Well, in the event that there is a ceasefire, you're going to need somebody to monitor the
Right.
situation,
That's another
right?
thing. That's another thing.
You know, you hear about the OSCE, which you already have a lot of experience with.
Right.
The
Right.
United Nations, we know that that's probably about pointless as it
Yeah.
can be. So probably this European force would be needed or useful at
Right.
least in that.
Right.
But Russia would never accept it, would they?
I don't think so. With OSCE, yeah, they kind of, that's really a flat tire. They're not really doing much. This organization was, as you said, even between 2014 and 2022 in Donbass, quite useless. Basically just fixating who shot who, forgetting about the larger context, like who is attacking who is the aggressor, who is the victim, because Russia was an aggressor even at the point of time. So the OSCE monitors, they didn't see their job in doing that. So what we in Ukraine, of course, we were always upset. Like, we're defending ourselves. So what are you talking about? How are you putting on the same kind of level Ukraine and Russia, even if we are fighting back? That's what we do to defend ourselves. So, but maybe they will come back. Maybe it will be different. Yeah, you're right. It's one of the issues that is still not resolved. The observation mechanism. Like, who's going to be observers? Americans should provide assistance in the sense of imagery from satellites and intelligence resources that they have. Clearly, that's their participation in that respect would be very much welcome. And so far, we understand that Mr. Trump is okay with that. All right, but we would like to see more of American participation, more of active participation in that reinforcement, in that reassurance force. But apparently, that's not going to happen. So the idea is that Putin signed something, Moscow and Washington signed something, above the heads of Ukrainians and Europeans that would dramatically impact European security.
Yeah.
And then Europeans and Ukrainians would just have to live with it and implement everything. Europeans would have to help Ukraine. Europeans would have to send this reassurance force. Obviously, naturally, Europeans are up in arms. Like, why is someone signing some treaty, not even consulting with us, and even then delegating most of the hard work to us after presumably the treaty is signed? So you can understand the nervousness in European capitals.
Right, but isn't that an impetus to get the Europeans to actually step up and take this situation? I mean, this is the European continent.
I guess the impetus for them not to be so impotent, right? Yeah, I guess.
Very well
right.
said.
So, yeah, I mean, of course, Europeans are big on talks. We understand that now. But there needs to be something, to back up rhetoric, and it's often missing. And sometimes there are contradicting messages as well. Like, for instance, President Macron has been very hard on Russia recently and Russian threat to European security. But the other day he says that we need to actually include Russia in European security and we should consider their interests. Something similar to what he was saying actually in the early days of the full-scale invasion, or before February 2022, when he came so many times to Moscow to back Putin to reconsider not to attack Ukraine. So,
well, let's talk about that. Macron faced heavy criticism at the beginning of the full-scale invasion because he was saying that we need to give Russia an off-ramp here so that it can save face. And I think there's an element of this that is true. And right now where we are, again, would it not be wise to give Russia some kind of off-ramp? I'm not saying give them territory or give them their maximalist demands, but give them a way to save face so that they can go back home to their public and say, we have achieved the objectives of the special military operation, because that, at the end of the day, is what they want to say.
Well, first of all, in a society that Russian society is, today you can do it any day, with any peace deal or without any peace deal. The Putin would just talk to Russians and say, look, we won because we were fighting the entire NATO. They haven't defeated us. There are no NATO tanks on the streets of Moscow or in the Red Square. We control a big portion of Ukraine. So that's a total victory for us. So we can stop. So there's no need for him to work hard to sell any deal to Russian public. But of course, on the international arena, that's where he understands that he needs to project strength and confidence and be feared and respected. And that's why he is not backing away, not backing off from this maximalist ultimatum-style demands on Ukraine. where he basically says it's our way or highway. Why should he actually be not confident? Because he's actually progressing on the front line. There is no strong sanctions against him, definitely no strong secondary sanctions. There is no massive supply of weapons to Ukraine at the moment as we speak. There are many decisions. Again, there's many talks. But I'm afraid the dominant mood is like, okay, why should we send more weapons to Ukraine if maybe we will have a peace deal tomorrow? Like, what does it make any sense? And of course, it's wrong on two accounts. First of all, the peace deal is not around the corner. It will be still a long time before we get to any peace deal. And second of all, even if there is a peace deal, Ukraine will still have to be supported strongly in a post-war, in a post-active conflict kind of stage, with weapons, with financial assistance, humanitarian assistance. That will be very important. Actually, that will be the major test of the will of the allies in this coalition of willing countries, which is cracking sometimes, quite frankly, because we've heard, I think, from a Norwegian person the other day who said, why are we, or was it Swedish, I can't remember, but why are we spending so much money? Many other European countries are not doing anything similar. So there is really some cracks, and as you know, on the Russian frozen assets, there were some cracks in that. So unfortunately, of course, yes, there is some Ukraine fatigue. There is some political leaders in Europe who think like, okay, maybe enough is enough. And not to mention the public opinion, where people also say, well, this war is almost for 4 years, like full-scale part of it, and we're spending so much money. And now European Union is sending more, like 90 billion euros again to Ukraine. So how many more should we send when we actually have some pressing concerns and challenges within our societies and within our economies?
Right. Well, at least the 90 billion is there, right? So this should give, and part of that was to give Ukraine, put Ukraine in a position that it can negotiate from a position of strength in these negotiations. But, based at the developments, again, that we just discussed this week, what do you think that's going to be the outcome of the talks in Moscow? How is Moscow going to buy more time, show Trump that they're playing ball, they're going along? What are their sticking points, do you think, going to be after we saw the Europeans and the United States sit down with Ukraine this week?
I think their game plan is quite clear. I mean, they want to use Trump pushing Ukraine, squeezing Ukraine to deliver what they want from Ukraine. If Trump can't do it, then okay, they'll just continue the war. They said as much in the recent major speech by Putin, actually, where he said, yeah, we are ready to continue to fight the war. Or even in Istanbul meetings, for instance, between Ukrainian and Russian delegations some months ago, when the Russians said, we can continue the war forever, like permanently, it's no problem for us, but it's going to be a problem for you in Ukraine. But historically, Russia, of course we're going to be stronger and we're going to prevail eventually. So it's intimidation tactics. And that's why Putin, I think, is going to say that this is a good plan. A lot of times people expect that Putin is going to just discard it and reject it. But most of the times he said, it's a good plan, it's a good idea, it's a good suggestion. But we just need more time to think about it, maybe more modifications being made to it. And in the meantime, dragging out the process.
Well, another good indicator that we see this week, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, tends to be pretty much on the side of Ukraine. He came out and said that they're preparing more sanctions for Russia. So maybe next week this could come out. What do you think those sanctions would entail, and what do you think?
Exactly.
What kind of sanctions do you think would really bite right now?
I'm kind of skeptical. We'll see. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but we've been taught on so many occasions. There's promise of sanctions, some biting sanctions, some bone-crushing
20 packages
sanctions,
in Europe.
and nothing happens really. No, but that's from European Union. But from American side, I mean, there've been so many times that Trump said there'll be sanctions, and eventually there were some sanctions, of course, on Rosneft and Lukoil, two major Russian oil producers. But it's not enough, and many of those sanctions are not even in place right now. They're not really fully implemented. There was secondary sanctions. There was this worry among many buyers of Russian oil, like India, for instance, like maybe they're serious Americans and we'll have to stop buying Russian oil. But then they've been reassured, no, it's not that a big deal, you can continue as you were before. So it's not the kind of sanctions that would actually push Russia to reconsider their position. You really need to feel them, the harm, the hurt the pain of the sanctions before Putin says, okay, maybe I cannot continue this war. Because, yes, there are some critical elements in the Russian economy that are showing it's wearing off. It's also showing some cracks, not necessarily in the sense that it's going to just explode tomorrow.
Right.
But if you provide more pressure on them, they are actually going to be in a difficult situation in time. Ukraine, of course, is in a difficult situation, like with the 90 billion that's been provided by the European Union now for the next 2 years. That's not even enough, as you know, to fully support Ukrainian budget. There is a budget gap. There is a bigger amount of money that would need to be given to Ukraine, weapons plus humanitarian assistance. So maybe other players, many other players outside of Europe, like Canada, like Japan, like many others, or International Monetary Fund and others, that would have to provide the rest for Ukraine to stay afloat. Well, this is a big war, and this is a big country. I mean, Europe is the biggest European country, actually. Ukraine is the biggest European country. So therefore, you need to provide a lot of money, and the logic is that we are trying to explain for all these 4 years, Ukrainians, to the Europeans, like, it's not really only our war. It's not only about our survival. It's really about your interests. I'm not even talking about values, okay, but interests too, European security. So it's not some, vague menace, which is in Rio.
Yeah, that brings us here to Poland and Vladimir Zelensky coming to Warsaw on Friday. Yeah. We also saw Donald Tusk say in Brussels on Thursday, what did he say? It was it's either money today or blood tomorrow.
Right.
I think Poland understands this.
Yeah.
How do you think these meetings went down on Friday with both President Nawrocki, the first meetings with President Zelensky and Nawrocki, and afterwards they met with Prime Minister Donald Tusk. Where do you see the Polish relationship? Do you see it as fractured as it was at one point, or do you think that we're whole again and back on the same page?
I think there is still some fracture there, but in general, I should say that there is more of a consistent Polish approach to Ukraine. And even before, like you said, there was some fracture, but with the previous government, for instance, with peace government, they were supportive of Ukraine. With Platforma Obywatelska, they were also supportive of Ukraine. I mean, understanding this menace and the threat of Russia. Yes, the peace, for instance, they fall through and didn't have any good relationship, for instance, with ideological partners and allies in Hungary, for instance, disagreeing on the Russian threat and European security, and they need to help Ukraine. So drastically different perspectives there from, let's say, Polish conservatives and Hungarian populists, right? So, but going back to today, the eyes were clearly on what you can see on TV right now, which is meeting with President Nawrocki, because, of course, he is singing a little different tune in the sense of Ukraine-Polish relations. He's always talking about the agriculture, economy. He's talking, of course, about historical memories and certain pages in the Polish-Ukrainian relations.
Well,
I think it went well. I think it went well after all.
Let's address that. We got about 3 minutes left.
Right.
The deep historical rift that continues to persist. I mean, I remember during the last government when Law and Justice was in place, this was something that they were trying to approach, and it was met with skepticism. It was met with angst in Kyiv. What needs to be done to repair this rift?
Well, I think that first of all, there needs to be an understanding that the priority today is not on those episodes, say 80 years ago, however painful they are. They should not dictate, I think, the nature of Ukraine-Polish relations today. And actually, in the 1990s, under President Kwasniewski, and he was coming to Odessa often, by the way, my hometown, the Ukraine and Poland signed a very unique document in historic forgiveness for whatever bad things we've done to each other over centuries. It was a very intensive history of bilateral relations. So let's forget it. Let's turn the page, all right? Let's respectfully remember the wrongs, maybe, and try to correct the wrongs, but also keep an eye on the ball, laser focus on a priority, which is Russian threat and how, if Ukraine fails, how this Russian threat will be enormously bigger for Poland and much more difficult to deal with Poland, despite Polish resoluteness and military preparedness.
There'll be plenty of time to resolve those historical differences.
And there's been some progress
once
on
we,
that account.
take care of this pressing issue first.
Right.
Well, Vladimir Dubovik, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate having you, and I wish we had more time.
Right.
Can't wait to have you.
It's always a
next
pleasure.
time. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
And that's all the time we have here on this edition of Ukraine This Week. Join us again next week for all the latest from the war in Ukraine. If you ever miss an episode, check out our YouTube channel, TVP World. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye.